Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel. My name's James, aka the OG Viking biker. Just give you a little information about myself. I've been riding since 2022. I started out on a Kawasaki Z800, which was an absolutely beautiful machine. However, I found it a little bit too small for myself and for my needs, not in regards to power or anything like that, but literally the physical size of the bike, because of the physical size of myself and wanting to go on tours and take Mrs. OG Viking biker out with me. This video is day one of our first ever tour, which is of the UK. We've done Land's End to John Groates, visiting many landmarks along the way. Just after travelling down to Land's End from South Wales, we dropped our luggage off at the Airbnb that we were staying in, and then made our way down to Land's End to get the obligatory photographs of the start line and photos of the bikes under the actual Land's End sign. The guys there were absolutely fantastic and really accommodating, let us take our bikes through, had professional photos done. And you find us now going for our evening meal, and obviously being at Land's End, it would be rude not to go to the first and last inn of England. The place has fantastic reviews, and in all honesty the food was absolutely brilliant and the service was just as good. Personally, I would highly recommend the fish and chips, absolutely stunning. So I'm currently riding a BMW R1250 GS Adventure, arguably the best adventure tourer on the market, and in my opinion there is no other adventure tourer that comes anywhere near close to doing what this machine can do. Absolutely love this thing. Handles like an absolute dream, even with all of the luggage and Mrs. OG Viking biker on the back. Yes, obviously I have to take it a little bit slower when we're fully loaded, but she just never misses a beat. Keeps giving and putting a stupid schoolboy grin on my face absolutely every time that I swing my leg over her. So for this trip I am using a set of Boomot soft luggage panniers, which have the steel frame backing to them, so they connect straight to the frame of the actual bike itself and lock into place via a key. I've got one, the smaller one, the exhaust side, and Mrs. OG biker has got the slightly larger one on the non-exhaust side. We also have the standard back box that came with the bike, which we have been keeping sort of everyday essentials in. A tank bag, we've got a Givey 15 litre tank lock tank bag, which I've been keeping slightly heavier items in to try and keep some more weight forward on the bike. So I've got a DX1000 lock for the bike, which I have kept in there, along with an alarmed disc lock and a couple of other little locks for the helmets, so that we can lock them to the frame of the bike when we are exploring, and a few other bits and pieces that we use quite regularly on the trip. We also have two bags attached to the crash bars at the front of the bike, one either side, containing our waterproofs. So one side was mine, one side was Mrs. OG Viking biker's, so we had constant access to those if we needed them. I also have a toolbox just underneath the frame at the back of the bike. This is a cheaper one that I had off of eBay rather than a more expensive one, and to be honest it's done an absolute fantastic job. I've only needed it a couple of times, but it's stored everything I need it to store. So we've got my uncle riding point on this tour. He is our route planner and chief navigator, and as he works in logistics, I think that's probably the best person to choose for the job, to be fair. He's currently riding a Triumph Sprint GT 1050. He's kitted up with the standard Triumph GT pannier boxes and top box, which to be fair were considerably larger than the boxes that I had on my BMW, so he could store a fair amount more than we could, and also my aunt riding pillion. My uncle's been riding for many years, quite a lot longer than I have myself. He's had many bikes over the years. I think this is his third Triumph Sprint. Obviously he keeps coming back to the brand because he absolutely loves them, and to be fair, I can see why. After this trip, it was an absolutely fantastic bike, and again, just like mine, never let us down and just kept on giving. He's also a blood biker with Cornwall Gold certification, meaning that I learned quite a lot this trip myself, and honestly feel like a much better rider after it. So we originally planned this trip to celebrate my uncle's 50th birthday, and we will be in Groates on the day he turns 50. And personally, I can't think of any better way to spend your birthday than on a 9-day motorbike tour. So this is our first stop of day one, which is Cornwall Gold. There is a museum on site with interactive exhibitions, gold digging, local shops. It's completely free to enter, but unfortunately it was closed when we arrived because we arrived a little bit too early. So it ended up just being a quick little pit stop for us to have a little snack and drink before getting back out onto the road. We did make one more quick pit stop before actually leaving Cornwall, and that was for a proper Cornish cream tea. If I'm entirely honest, I don't see the difference between a Devon cream tea and a Cornish cream tea. I know I'm potentially going to get slated for that. I know that one has the clotted cream on the bottom and the jam on top, and the other has the jam on the bottom and the clotted cream on top. However, I'm not sure which way round that is or what ratio they should be. As far as I'm concerned, they both taste amazing and it doesn't really matter. So enough of my rambling for now. I'll fade out to some music and allow you just to enjoy some of the views and come back in later. Our next stop for the day was the Cheddar Gorge, which, considering it's probably less than 2 hours from my house and I've never actually been, it's probably about time I did. It was actually a beautiful little town, however very busy, very touristy, but we were going through it on a weekend. It was a Sunday we were going through it, so I can imagine it was, or it is even, a little bit quieter during the week. We had a nice spot of lunch in one of the local cafés and picked up some proper fudge while we went through as well. There is a lot of history in this town, but I won't go into that on this video, because all being said, we are here after all for the road and to ride through it, looking at the scenery, taking everything in on our way through. I'll leave you just enjoy the rest of this and I'll pop back later. Our next stop of the day finds us at Clifton Suspension Bridge, which was unfortunately closed today due to an event that was going on. We did, however, manage to park up and get a few photos. We did end up stopping here for a lot longer than expected, but that's because we met a couple of lads that were actually riding Land's End to John o' Groates on push bikes for charity. And here we are arriving at our final stop of the day, Tintern Abbey. This was just a short pit stop to re-energise, have a drink, something to eat, and take in the sights. So that's day one coming to a conclusion. We're just en route now to our accommodation for the night, which is an Airbnb in the Forest of Dean area of the Wye Valley. It was a little house called Badger's Cottage. It was very comfortable, well presented, well maintained, clean and reasonably priced. I would highly recommend it if anyone was looking at staying in the area. There was ample off-road parking for both bikes in the form of a gravel driveway where we managed to park both bikes side by side and lock them up for their night. Perfectly safe, absolutely no issues. And as an added bonus, the local pub serves Sunday dinner up until 8 p.m, which was perfect for us because we arrived at this one a bit late. Thank you very much for watching. Ride safe, and remember, life is an adventure. If you enjoyed my video, please remember to like and subscribe.